The lesson today is American Power Tips the Balance. And before we get into that, I'll mention today's little joke here. It actually is good, it might be useful for your conferences. So we'll see if any of you are able to use it. The joke is, why aren't you doing well in history? And your response can be, because the teacher keeps on asking about things that happened before I was born. Awesome. Now, let's get into the actual lesson for today. American Power Tips the Balance. Let's look over the concepts. On what side did the United States join in the fighting? How did the entry of the United States affect the fighting in Europe? And who were the victors of World War I? Who were the losers of World War I? And the key vocabulary for the day: Allied Central Powers, Armistice, and then the convoy system. We'll take a look at that. So World War I begins in 1914, and it's not going to be until 1917 that the United States joins the war, and they joined the side of the war. They joined the Allied powers in their fight against Austria-Hungary, Germany, among other nations. And when they do, the first obstacle that the United States needs to overcome is the fact that they aren't ready for war. They need to mobilize. They need to get their forces, their people, ready for war. They need to get men into the army so that they can fight. They need to get machinery ready to go, weapons, so on and so forth. Then the next obstacle they have to overcome is the fighting's happening in Europe. They need to get all their mobilized forces. Once they are mobilized, they need to get those over to Europe to join in the fighting, to help out the Allied powers. And they're going to need to do this through use of the convoy system. The reason why it's not a simple task getting all your men and machinery, wartime goods over to Europe is, think back to our last lesson, U-boats. The submarines, the German submarines, have had control of the Atlantic Ocean for about 2.5 years. So how is the United States going to protect their men, their ships on their way over? And the British and the United States talk about it, and they develop the convoy system, which is basically wartime ships protecting these other ships that are carrying goods. And it does cut back on a lot of lives lost, a lot of U-boat attacks, etc., etc. Now, before we move any further with the United States and their impact on World War I, let's revisit the fact that World War I is about a two-front war for Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. The Western Front, is a fight between located near the Germany-France border, which you can see on the map there. The other fighting that takes place is happening on the border of Russia and Germany and Austria-Hungary. Okay, those are the two areas of fighting that are taking place. But 1917 is a big year, not just because America joins the war, but it's also a big year because Russia is going to leave the war. They have to deal with the revolution that is taking place inside that country. That revolution eventually creates the Soviet Union. And we're going to find out a whole lot more about the Soviet Union as we continue after this unit. But what it means for World War I is Russia is going to sign a truce with Germany and the Central Powers. And then Germany, Austria-Hungary, they can take all those troops along the Russia, Germany, Austria front border, Eastern Front, and they can push those troops west, giving a lot more manpower to the Central Powers to fight on the Western Front. That's a big problem. So with Russia dropping out of the war in 1917, what makes it so important, or what the United States brings most to the Allied powers in World War I, is it's not about manpower, it's not about Weaponry, it is about this newness, this freshness. It's about morale. They provide a huge boost to the Allied powers in a war that has gone on much longer than anyone has anticipated or had anticipated at the time. Many thought it was going to be a short war. It turns out to be a really long, grueling war. In the end, it's going to be the Central Powers that end up losing, and the biggest loser of them all is going to be Germany. Germany receives much of the blame for the fighting, and we see that in the Treaty of Versailles, which we'll talk about in a couple of videos from now. The next biggest set of losers is probably much of Europe. When the Depression hits in the late 1920s, Europe is hit really hard. Germany is hit with the Depression immediately because they have to make a lot of payments to the winning, victorious nations of the Allied powers. The biggest winner in all of this is probably going to be the United States. They didn't have to do a lot of the fighting. They held out for a long time, and when they come back, they experience what they believe are really good times, really productive, profitable times in the 1920s. Okay? That's it for this one. We'll come back next time and we'll talk about what the war is like during what life is like inside the United States while World War I is taking place.